This looks awesome. This talk is about brain preservation, realizing a new human option to live again. Hey.
Hey.
I'm going to read this thing for you.
Thank you.
Nice. This gentleman sitting behind me is a foresight consultant, educator, and scholar. He's co-founder of the Brain Preservation Foundation, working to validate mammalian brain preservation protocols. He's president of the Acceleration Studies Foundation, a consultancy studying accelerating scientific, technological, business, and social change, a lecturer in leadership and technological change at the Naval Postgraduate School, and a technical advisor at Next IT, a leader in intelligent virtual agent platforms. John's a graduate of the University of Houston MS program in Studies of the Future. Please join me in welcoming John Smart. Have fun.
Donna, thank you. Well, it's lovely to be here at BIL. Is this the first BIL in San Francisco?
Yes.
Woo! Man, this is where it belongs. So, BIL's all about expanding horizons, just like TED, but we get to do it ourselves, so more fun. And this is going to be one of those far-out talks. I'm a futurist. I've been a futurist for 12 years now, professionally for 10 years. Professionally just means people pay you money. That's the definition of a professional futurist. And this is the weirdest thing I've come across in the last 12 years. So it's, when I first found it, I thought, God, this is so interesting. And then I met the guy that was doing it, and so we decided to start a little nonprofit about it. Okay. So what is it? It is brain preservation. Okay. And the nonprofit's called the Brain Preservation Foundation. We started it in 2010. The title of the talk is Brain Preservation, Realizing a New Human Option to Live Again. And another subtitle, Why is the option to inexpensively preserve our brains when we die good for ourselves and society, and how you can help that. Okay, so that's the main idea. And the subtitle, Realizing a New Human Option, is a double entendre, because technology is giving us the physical options of preserving our brains when we die. But we also have this mental option of deciding, is that a valuable thing for me, or for my family, or my kids, or whatever, right? So there's these two separate questions that we have, which is the technology and the social and the personal decisions, okay? And I'm going to try and suggest to you that you can't, technology is going to realize this option, and you as an individual will be able to realize this option if you choose to, okay? And the conversations around realizing the option personally are, I think, the most interesting conversations we could have. Why is this even possibly valuable? So before we get started, can I ask, if this was available for free, someone could magically preserve your brain when you die, and your friends, anyone who wanted to do it, how many people would even consider, maybe I might do it? That's pretty good. So that's about half the people. But there's another half the people whose arms are tired, or they just think this is kind of foolish, right? And I would like to say I was originally in that camp. This is kind of foolish. And my first argument was, man, the universe is really good at preserving everything that matters anyway. All the genes that mattered made it through the KT meteorite extinction. They just got assorted instead of dinosaurs and little things in the water. They just were these little mammal things that then blew up, and look what they made, okay? That's pretty cool. So yeah, the genes don't die. The memes, the ideas that we care about, we back them up in all of our friends. Why even do this? All right. So first, the science. So are we our connectome? The 100 billion neurons and the 100 trillion connections that make up us, and all the synaptic weights on the ends of that. Well, there's several scientists who say that we are. And the book Connectome by Sebastian Sung is an excellent start if you want to read the science of that and say, yeah, this is you. Ken Hayworth, my co-founder, he is one of the people who leads the development of brain preservation. Right now, they're perfectly preserving little brains like zebrafish. Their brains are about the size of the tip of a pencil. Or portions of the brains of flies, okay, are being preserved right now. The whole fly brain is probably like 2015. You watch, okay. And what they do is they perfectly preserve them, and then they scan them under an electron microscope, and they upload those scans into the computer. So now they have an uploaded brain. Okay, so uploading's already here. All right? The thing is, you can train those little fish to swim to a certain corner of the aquarium, right? And then you could scan it, and you could say, oh yeah, he was trained to, he could have gone anywhere, and he was trained to scan to go over there. See, there it is, right in the scan. We just read the memory out. Can they do that today? No. That's called breaking the long-term memory code in the cortex, and we haven't quite figured that out. There's tens of thousands of neuroscientists trying to figure out the long-term memory code, though. It's one of the most exciting areas of neuroscience and artificial intelligence research, and it will fall probably this decade. And that means they can take tiny little worms like C. elegans, the size of the sliver of the tip of your fingernail. They can train it to do one thing. They can preserve it, scan it, upload it, and they can tell you how it was trained. They can unblind the study, and they can say, there it is. We just read the memory right out of the brain. Why? Because C. elegans have a few hundred neurons, and they work just like ours, associational connections. Instead of 8 neurotransmitters in learning and memory, they use 6, and instead of electrochemical action potentials, they use something called electrotonics. It's a little simpler, but it's the same thing. All animals use neurons to store information, and that's who we are. We've got a bunch of scientists who are interested in exploring this idea. Can a large mammalian brain be perfectly preserved at the synaptic level using these techniques? We set up a prize in 2010. We got an anonymous donor and some people who are not anonymous. 25% of it goes to the first whole mouse brain that's preserved, 75% to the first whole pig brain that's preserved using a technique we could use on humans. This year, Sean Mikula in Germany submitted a mouse brain that looks like it works. By the end of this year, we'll probably be announcing, yeah, he wins the first quarter of the prize. So if you're a mouse, you can live in the future as long as you want. Okay? That's quite possibly going to be proven, okay? Because the brain looks great, but we got to look at it under an electron microscope and trace the circuits and show that everything that's been currently implicated in learning and memory is there. So disclaimer, we don't preserve people at the BPF. We don't advocate any particular procedure or company. What we want to do is understand, can this technology work? Can it be made affordable? And if so, can we make it available as an option to anybody who might want it? Now, a guy 2 years ago did a study. It's called When I'm 164 is the book, if you want to read that on Amazon. The question I asked, how many people might be willing to do it if it was free? What percentage of people in developed societies said yes? What would you argue? 1, 2, 10? 50? It's only 1% right now. And I think it's because of this, I'm already well backed up in all my friends kind of a thing. And like, why bother, right? And there's a lot of interesting questions. Some people think it's not even possible, right? So there's a lot of interesting reasons that 1% is so small. We can argue what those are. But the question is, 1%, that's still almost 4 million people in the United States alone, right? Should those people have an option if they want it? And if they had it, how would society possibly start to change? So now we get to questions of like, how do we live beyond our life today, currently? Well, here's 6 ways for your consideration, right? Sam. Children. That's a pretty good way. I pass on all the memes that I care, all the genes that I care about, and all the memes that I care about. Those get backed up in my kids, and I'll try and keep the bad memes away from them and give them the good memes. And works. Memes and teams. What's a team? A meme is an idea that replicates in brains. A team is a technological algorithm that replicates in society. Susan Blackmore, the person who coined or wrote the book The Meme Machine in the 80s, came up with this concept about 5 years ago, and it's a really cool concept. Technology itself is kind of a learning system, right? Kevin Kelly's What Technology Wants is a good book for more on that. Now, the interesting thing is we've got number 3 and 4. These are new. We can live again in our experiences, and we can have all of our experiences recorded our entire life if we want. Those are called life logs, right? And there's something even kind of weirder. We can have a simulation of us that lives on after we die. In fact, there's a company I'm going to show you shortly that's building one. Right? And then the last two are memories and identity. But if your brain is perfectly preserved, you could give your memories to the future. If you don't want to be woken up, you don't have to be woken up, because we already know consciousness is separate from memories and neurons. Just like an anesthesiologist can keep you from having consciousness while a neurosurgeon operates on you, your brain, if it's been scanned into a computer, memories can be pulled out of it, but the processes that create consciousness, the global synchrony, neural synchrony it's called, don't have to be turned on. The self-referential parts don't have to be turned on. So people can give memories if they want, like archaeological, they can be read like hard drives or archaeological digs in the future, right? And then the last one, maybe the most controversial, is, well, yeah, I don't want just my memories. I'd like to wake up in the future. So we can see there's different levels of this. And I think the creepiness factor for a lot of people really starts number 3 and number 4. And before you can get people to take these last two seriously, we're going to have a bunch of interesting questions and conversations about, do I want to run a life log my whole life? And do I want to have an agent that when I'm gone, my kids can talk to? That's a bit creepy, isn't it? Okay, there you go. And do I want to let Google or whoever's built my life log make it smarter every year by talking to my surviving friends so that's a better record of me? Do I possibly want for my mom's life avatar, maybe I can dial up or dial down one of the psychological factors? Because my mom was really hard on me, and when I was a kid, she was nicer. So I moved that up a little bit. My ideal mom, and I was more nurturing, and I'm more connected to my kids, right? But there's a lot of cultures where messing with your parents like that would be considered a seriously bad thing. So think about all the choices we're going to have. To roll through these. I'll be outside for questions if you'd like. As we get into this, before we even get to the memory and identity stuff, we can have all the interesting questions in this space here. Isaac Asimov was offered cryonics. What's cryonics? Freezing, right? You want to be freezing when you're dead? He was offered free. And this wealthy person, and what did Isaac say? He said, well, why would I want to be frozen? I've written 500 books. And that's such an awesome example of what I'm saying here, right? You can get your best ideas out, and so that may be the best way to live, isn't it? To try and live like that. But how many people get to write everything they care about before they die? Not necessarily everybody, right? So we can start to see the value of this option. And now we get to more weirdness. Here we have, Google Now. I was just over Transhuman Visions, and there was a couple guys wearing glass, and it looked kind of weird watching them, the cyborgs looking at me, recording everything. 600 cops in LA are going to have button cams, lapel cams that capture everything throughout the day, get analyzed later to make sure that they're doing things in the right way. So I have 5 left? I have 15 left? Okay, good. So many people have mentioned, if we'd had button cams on all the cops in Iraq that we were paying, to be good to their citizens rather than to be corrupt, how much more transparent how much more their policing would have been supporting the populace rather than running their own side games. Transparency is an incredibly powerful thing that we're just now starting to roll out in society. We're going to have all kinds of questions about its value. And the argument I'd like to make is we have to solve some of those questions before we're going to get to really taking seriously this idea of my memories and my identity living on. But I think we're well on track to doing that. So here's more weirdness. Just, I think, 2 weeks ago, attorney.me launched in MIT. Or MIT graduates. I think it's like 10 of them. And this is an avatar that grabs your social network, grabs all your email, and creates this crude thing that you can talk to after the person is gone. People leave their remembrances on Facebook pages now all the time, don't they, after someone passes? This is just kind of the next level of that. And these twins are going to start out really simple and dumb, but this decade, you're going to see them start giving you advice. I think by the end of this decade, there's going to be people running twins or agents or butlers, whatever you want to call them, that have a crude statistical map of your values. They've scanned all your email. They'll connect you up to other people on social networks that have similar interests. They will advise you on what to read. They'll even advise you on social engagements. And then maybe 5, 10 years later, they'll start advising you on what to buy and what to vote. And that is, I think, a seriously badass world. You're reaching for a can of tuna, and your Google Now green glass or your little wearable, wrist PC gives you a little green arrow, and you move your hands a couple inches from Bumblebee to Chicken of the Sea, and you send a "fuck you" message to Bumblebee because they're still killing the dolphins or their mercury level's too high. And you didn't even do it. Your twin did it. Just because it's reading all your scans, it knows what your interests are. And now people start getting these lobby twins, if you will. What initiative do I want to vote for? What powerful thing do I want to do to kind of keep these powerful actors in their little cages, right? So these twins are not simple, dumb things like they are today, another 10 years from now. And people leaving those behind are going to start to feel like my friend here who doesn't think he needs to do brain placination. He's got another reason he doesn't have to do it. I got this great little twin that's, my kids can talk to that. What do I need my brain for? Well, this is cut off here, but the reasons why people might do this, we've come down to 5. The cost of it, does it provably store your memories, or is it just a hoax, right? How simple, how reliable, and have my friends done it? And these things are going to start to change over the next decade to 2 decades. All 5 of those factors. And placination, rather than freezing, is one of the most interesting ones because it really lowers the cost. It might start at $20,000, might get as low as $5,000. There's a guy in Oregon who's offering brain placination for $3,500 when you die today. And he has no scientific evidence that it's perfectly preserving the brain. He's just offering it for $3,500. And you say, well, that's stupid. That's Oregon Cryonics. Go look it up, Oregon Cryonics. You'll see it right there. You can sign up. And you say, well, why would I want to do that? And he readily admits there's parts of the brain that are not being preserved in the micro capillaries of the brain because he doesn't have a protocol that's been research tested or whatever. But you know what his argument is? How many people remember the nun study? The famous Alzheimer nun study. And you looked at those brains of some of these nuns, and they were so smart and social. And you looked at their brains, and they were just full of Alzheimer's plaques. You say, well, how can that be? Well, that's how badass the brain is. Your brain is an associational neural network. It stores everything that it cares about in multiple places. You can't remember a person's name, you noodle around, remember some other little aspect of the person, you route around the damage just like the internet, and you reestablish the connection, bah, the person's name pops back out. So your brain is incredibly good at storing information. If you preserved a brain and you only had 80% of the brain perfectly plastinated, you still might have 99% of the person. We are not smart enough yet to know. But that's how good our evolutionary system is at caring about the things that, at stitching into the protein structures in the connectome, the things it cares about. So placination is done today for a lot of these anatomical specimens. Here's one of the leading Society of Placination leaders. And it's a process where you put these aldehydes in, and very quickly, thank you, very quickly it locks down all the protein structure, including all the microtubules. Some people think consciousness is my microtubules. Well, aldehyde's going to catch that too. It doesn't grab the fats, which are in the membranes, and we don't know how important that is. But what people currently do is they use a separate step called osmium, and they go in and fix the fats. And then, because there'll be continuing changes if there's still water, because water allows degradation, they push the water out and they push in an organic solvent, usually acetone. And then you're left with this plastic paperweight. That's you. Isn't that crazy? And these brains, like I said, these little tiny brains today are being uploaded, scanned into computers, and within 10 years, we're going to be reading those memories. We'll understand that code. That's my optimism speaking, right? There's so many people trying to actually understand the codes of model organisms in all these different model organisms, even mice in the olfactory sense, the olfactory, which is the oldest and primitive areas of the brain, right, for humans. There's people trying to teach a mouse a certain smell and then sacrifice, scan, upload, and figure out from the connectome what that mouse was exposed to. So smell memories may come first. Isn't that interesting? There's all these different ways that we store the things we care about. And we're actually not even smart enough today to know whether all these brains that were put into jars in formalin in the 1860s, 250 of them, including Paul Broca, the anatomist who first invented the process of fixing a brain and putting it into a jar, we don't even know if those people are still there. In fact, Carl Sagan, that was the first sentence that he said in Broca's Brain, his book in 1979. Is Paul Broca still there in his formalin-filled jar? Open question. Now, their membranes have been totally degraded because they're stored at room temperature. Okay? And you look at it under electron microscope, it looks like mush. But all of the protein structure has all been locked down by the aldehyde, the formaldehyde or the formalin. Now, some of those peptide bonds in the proteins have broken because, again, it's at room temperature and there's nothing else that's been done. So could a smart enough scanning system take that and kind of piece it back together and say, oh yeah, here you go. Paul Broca wakes up and tells us about mid-1800s France. We're not smart enough to know whether that can happen yet. Okay? What we do know is if you do those extra steps that I told you, fixing the fats and pushing the water out, you can take that and you can push it up into the computer and it looks exactly like a normal wild-type brain that you look at under 2-photon microscopy. Okay? Now, to do this for humans in any number, you got to get to them within 15 minutes of death. And this is you can't see this. This is a endocast of the human brain circulatory system. Basically, your circulation goes everywhere that matters in your brain. So if you push these, like formalin or glutaraldehyde through the brain within the magic 15 minutes before the circulatory system starts to collapse and the chemicals won't go in, you perfectly preserve everything. Okay? And there's been people who've died, like this woman who died. She was 90. She was like an hour and a half away from an ER, and her husband did CPR on her with a Capnograft. And, it was a man. Capnograft, and then 96 minutes later, they got into the ER, shocked him back to life because they just kept circulating blood, and they had oxygen mask, right? And just manual, and so. Yeah, so that 15 minutes can be pushed out. You can put anti-clotting agents in, you can give oxygen after death, you can lower oxygen demand. There's all these interesting tricks that could allow people who die 2 hours, maybe even longer, away from some place to be perfectly preserved if we wanted to. Where will a lot of these brains go if people start doing them? Well, we've been thinking about it, and we think, well, it's probably going to be cemeteries. That's probably going to be the majority, because it's the least behavior change, right? You just take a brain, you placinate it, you put it in the ground. Now Granny's in the ground, though, and people are starting to think, well, is Granny going to stay in the ground? I don't know. It starts changing your conversations around death and afterlife, doesn't it? That's a very interesting place to be. And I think we could be there, we could be at that place, we could start being at that place within 10 years. Okay? So how's it done? You take the brain, you preserve it, you cut it thin, you image it, and you reconstruct it using this automated software in computers. Thank you. And the current resolution is 5 nanometers, which gives you everything but the actual proteins, all the large molecular assemblages, and almost all neuroscientists think that's where all the information is stored. Now, if it's possible that some information is stored in actual specific tags on molecules, methylation and ubiquination are the two most highest candidates for that. If it's possible, then we may actually have to look at some of the signal states on a few of the proteins to pull that information out. It turns out we already know how to do that. That's what cryotransmission electron microscopy is. This is a single protein imaged by cryo-TEM. And there's a crazier scanning technology than cryo-TEM that's coming, that's waiting on the horizons. We all know what MRI is. MRI uses the signal in the hydrogen molecule to image a body. Something called multi-quantum MRI was invented about 5 years ago, and for things that are about a millimeter cubed with these little nanoprobes, they image and they read the entire molecular signature out of all of the molecules and reconstruct it. And what that means, to freak you out, is if that technology scales to a whole brain over the next 20, 30 years, 20, 30 years from now, you may be able to go into a MQ MRI machine and have a backup of you put on a hard disk. And if something happens, while you're still alive, and if something happens to you and you're up on K2 and your oxygen, system malfunctions or you fall into a crevice, I want to ask you this question. If you're a patternist like this gentleman right here, you think, hey, I'm already backed up, and now you've got an extra backup. You've got a hard drive backup. Are you going to feel that it's really violent to you to die? Or are you going to say, well, darn it, I should have packed that extra device for finding my crevices, I mean, it changes your sense of death, doesn't it? Maybe you become even more zen than some of you folks already are. All right. So, this is the tough question is, what are you? Are you your pattern? A lot of people in this room would say, yeah, I'm my pattern, and my pattern is well backed up in other people, and my own life is useful while I'm here, but I don't have to transfer it far into the future, and if it's going to be expensive or whatever, I may never want to do that. Let's wrap up. What are the motivations for preserving? Some people are going to preserve their brains for science, for medical science, for understanding mental disease. Some people are going to do it because they think preserved brains are going to be the fastest way to building smart computers. There's a lot of people who think that way. That's the fastest way to AI is neuroscience, computational neuroscience. I happen to be one of those people. So I think this is an incredibly useful tool for that too. And some people are going to want to do it for memory donation. I want to give my memories to the future. And if it gets inexpensive enough, that's when it gets interesting, in my opinion. And a few people are going to want to do it for self-identity. I want to go to the future. I think it'd be fun to keep doing whatever I'm doing. And so this, to me, is the most interesting second most interesting motivation. I want to do it because I'm not sure if it's useful, but it just feels like it's like a responsible thing to do. And in my preservation contract, I'm not going to say who should bring me back. Maybe my family might want to boot me up in 50 years. My kids might want to talk to me. Maybe some institution, my church might want to bring me back. Maybe my avatar, that little simulation that I mentioned, maybe it gets smarter and smarter, and it finally says, hey, I want some more of your backup in. That's weird, right? Or maybe I have no idea, and I'm just going to say, I'm going to leave it to the future to decide. This is the new Pascal's wager, if you will. It's so inexpensive to do, I just might as well do it. This is my most interesting motivation, though, for the future, for why you would do it. If you had 100,000 people that had done this in any society, I'm going to argue the following. 100,000 people who've preserved their brains for $3 grand, $5 grand, or whatever they did paid it for life insurance in advance, so it cost them hardly anything. I would argue that society is going to be significantly more science-oriented, progress-oriented, future-oriented, preservation-oriented, sustainability-oriented, right? I'm not going to piss on the future because I might come back. And truth and justice-oriented. Imagine someone sees some injustice that doesn't get punished. Well, they got it right here, man. Digital forensics. I'm going to give that to the future, and that information is going to come out. And more community-oriented. Sorry. In the Netherlands, 130,000 people are a member of the life ending group. So they have the legal physician-assisted suicide. 2.3% of all citizens in Netherlands use physician-assisted suicide to die. Isn't that amazing? So they've had this freedom for almost 12 years now. Hospital, I'd like to be able to do it at home if I want. My question to you is, if 100,000 people have got this option to brain preserve, what do you think the society would be like then? What kind of rights and freedoms might we have? How much more science future-oriented might society be then? And I guess I'll end with that. Thanks.
Thank you, John Smart. That was awesome. We are coming around the bend here. We've got a couple speakers left before it's party time. A couple more things.